Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Unity Spiritual Center in Pflugerville. Today our topic is into action, and it was chosen by Sue. Sue suggested it last Sunday. And so today we're going to talk about being into action. So thank you so much, Sue. And so what came up for me as I was preparing the message was our 5 unity principles. So I'd just like to go ahead and read this. And I love this little card that we have because it starts out with 1. There is only one presence and one power active as the universe and as my life, God the good. And we definitely had a taste of that in our meditation this morning. So thank you so much for that, please. And 2, our essence is of God. Therefore, we are inherently good. This God essence called the Christ was fully expressed in Jesus. 3, we are co-creators with God, creating reality through thoughts held in mind. 4, through prayer and meditation, we align our heart-mind with God. Denials and affirmations are tools we use. 5, through thoughts, words, and actions, we live the truths we know. And so here at Unity, we get to practice these principles on a daily basis. And one of the things that I'm grateful for in this little card is it really tells me about my relationship with God, because that's really what 1 and 2 does. You know, there's one presence, one power active in the universe and in this world, and in me, that's God the good, and that our essence is of God. And then when we get to 3, 4, and 5, it says we are co-creators with God. Well, co-creators for me means that we're going to create together. So we're going to be in action in our lives, if we choose to be. Now, the choices that we have are based on what's going on internally for us. And so we can choose whatever we want because God has given us free will. And in that free will, we make our lives. We make our lives through the actions that are ours to take. And everyone does that, together in their lives. So I have a role to create to play in what I create in my life, and that depends on what's going on in my mind. Because in reality, I create my reality through the thoughts that I hold in my mind. And there are so many actions that we can take as a result of whatever we choose to do, because God gave us free will and said, Bruce, Sue, Alex, we can do, whatever it is that we choose to do. So if we look at also what it says that I need to align my heart mind with God and the tools we use to do so. And then the 5th thing we have is we live the truth we move through our thoughts, words, and actions. So whatever we are doing is going to be as a result of who we're being inside. In other words, our 5 basic unity truths tell us our relationship with God, and then the actions which we need to take in order to live our lives in accord with our 5 basic unity principles. And in order to do that, in my experience, we need to be conscious and aware. And if we want to change anything, we need to take some action. If we don't take any action, anything that happens may not be what we want. The 10 Commandments in Exodus 20 are written instructions for God's people, the actions that God gave us to take to live in accordance with His will. So in order to take action in accord with God's will, we need to meditate, pray, and ask for God's guidance and the power to carry that out. And in our lives, for me, it's important that I do that on a daily basis, because without it, I may be left floating on the sea, so to speak, and that may not result in very good outcomes. So, in Matthew 7:7, let's see. Yeah, I do have the Ten Commandments bordered here at the start of the book. But in Matthew 7:7, Jesus' message is, I just love how, so I've got a version of the Bible which has Jesus' words in red. This page happens to be basically covered in red. So, and in here he says, in 7:7, it starts as, ask, it says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds. And to him who knocks, it will be opened. Or what a man is there among you who, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. So in other words, my behavior towards other people needs to be in accord with what God, what I want from God. And I can't have something from God if I'm walking around being unpleasant and angry and pointing the finger at you because you're not doing it right. And so for me, this is a very, very important reading. If we then look at our next reading here, it says Matthew 22:34. And he says, Jesus is here talking with the Pharisees. And then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him, and saying, Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law? And Jesus said to him, you shall love the Lord your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. So,
Wow.
Christ was very, very clear in what he asked of us and what he asked of us to do. Because that's really clear to me. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. So that means all of them. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbors as yourself. And that means that I love the people in my life and the people around me. And then he ends by saying, on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So he's given us specific directions in how we want to live our lives and the things that we want to do in our lives. And the results of our actions depend on who we are being and the actions that we take. Now, whether they're in accord with what we just read or not is up to who? It's up to all of us, every one of us. We get to choose because God gave us free will, and we get to choose what our actions will be in the world around us. Will we be kind and loving, or will we be angry and pointing the finger at other people? And, if you only behaved right, my life would be good. That's not a very successful way to live your life. Definitely not for me. I can guarantee that. So our spiritual, who we're being depends on our spiritual condition. And our spiritual condition is the foundation of who we are and the basis for the actions we take in our lives. If we're angry and frightened, our being will be influenced negatively by our thinking. Our thinking is what creates our feelings. For a long time, I thought that my feelings created our thinking, but I have a spiritual advisor that guided me to see that, and I've had many of them, continue to have, that it's actually my thinking that creates my feelings, and out of that then generates who I'm being. And those words can cause me to be loving and kind, or they can cause me to be angry and resentful and hateful. And God gives us the ability to choose whatever it is for our lives. So my prayer for myself on a daily basis is that I do God's will in all of my actions. And some days I do well at that, and some days I may need to do a little better. But when our thinking is faulty or self-centered, and of course that may not apply to anybody in this congregation or the audience, except yours truly. The feelings we generate will be negative, as will our being. Accordingly, our actions will be what? They'll be harmful to ourselves, and if we are interacting with others, they will probably be harmful to others. We cannot live internally with feelings such as fear, panic, terror, and dread without having our actions reflect our internal feelings. And our feelings are generated by our thinking. To change our being, we need to change our thinking. However, that is easier said than done. And that's where our 5 unity principles come in, because it tells us who we are in 1 and 2, and then it gives us specific instructions. It says, you guys, you Bruce, are a co-creator. You can create, reality through thoughts held in mind, and your life doesn't have to be the way it's being if you're angry and out of sorts. And then, of course, we have prayer and meditation, and we align our heart mind with God. And then through thoughts, words, and actions, we live the truth we know. So if we practice these principles on a daily basis, our lives will change. And I know that there's many people in our congregation here who have experienced the changes that come by living according to God's word and God's will for us. So one of the things that I've had to do, and that others may have to do, is recognize that we've come up against a wall that using our own human power we can't change. Like we can't go through the wall, we can't go under the wall, we can't go around the wall, we can't go over the wall. So we're stuck. So to change the situation, we need to ask God to change our thinking. And changing our thinking will do several things. 1, it will change how we feel. 2, we can then change our actions if we pray and ask for guidance from God, and we're willing, now this is a big one, to take the actions that we receive in His guidance, And He said, He brought us to earth, and He gave us free will. So that choice is always within us. So to do so, it's important that we have a spiritual mentor, and having a human being as our spiritual mentor will help us to keep from self-justified. We have our congregation, as well as Robert, when he is well again. Our prayer chaplains, and I really thank them for their service, and classes to assist in prayer and changing our minds. And additional help comes from in Matthew 22, 34 and to 40, which we've already talked about, and our instructions are what? The instructions are, you shall love the Lord, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Well, then in Mark 3:35, goes on to say something else, and he says, in this area, in this section, Jesus' mothers and brothers sent for him, and it's in verse 31. It says, then his brothers and his mothers came And his mother came, and standing outside, they said to him, calling him. And a multitude was sitting around him, and they said to him, look, your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you. But he answered them, saying, who is my mother or my brothers? And he looked around in a circle at those who sat about him, and said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God is my brother and my sister and my mother. So in other words, what he was telling us is that we're all in this together. And we may live in the delusion that we're separate and apart, but the truth is, we're not. We're all connected. And we could hear that this morning and feel that when Dee did her beautiful meditation and continued us on our journey as we move through this hour together. So, in addition to the verses I've listed, there are many resources to help us get into action, which is, thank you, Sue, the title of what we're talking about. And in order for something to change, something needs to change. And most probably, it's going to be me that needs to change my behavior and my actions. Thank you for that, Patty. She's nodding her head. So, we have our Bible and the verses I've listed, and there are many resources to help us to get into action. These include the writings of various New Thought people, and some examples are Charles Fillmore's writings, who started Unity. He and Myrtle started things back in the 1800s. And an electronic source of those is a Kindle, which has available the collection of Charles Fillmore's writings, Volume 1 containing 7 books and Volume 2 containing 6 books. And what I realized was last night when I was finishing up my preparation was, Bruce, you actually need to read all of this stuff if you haven't read it yet. So that's one of the reasons that I started again in the Quest class. I did this years and years and years ago in Unity, and I think it was when we were still back over on desktop perhaps, but it was a long time ago. And so when Val said that she was going to lead the class, then I was glad to be able to take part. And Val is out of business, or she would have been here with us today. And then we have the Metaphysical Bible by Charles Fillmore, the 12 Powers, and then the Dynamic Laws of Prosperity by Catherine Podner. Now, other sources include our daily word, which we have already heard of today. And that is in hard copy, and I think there are some copies at the back of our daily word. And you can also get that electronically, so you can have it on your iPad. And I have it on my trusty iPad right there. And we have many, many classes at Unity here. And one of the examples is the Quest, which, as I mentioned, Val has started. There's also a plethora of spiritual books and CDs, such as those by authors such as Joe Vitale, who was one of the I guess he was the keynote speaker at our conference that we had. And there were so many of us that were from this congregation that were at that, and I really appreciated that. And all our resources can be used to advance our spiritual life and assist in putting our Unity principles into action. And RJ posts our messages online. The photo for our current message, Into Action, shows, so if you haven't seen it yet, it shows a baby boy, and he's got his little pants on, and he's got his little hat, and he's sitting on this brown patch of either grass or dirt. And then out behind him, in front of him, there's a little lake. And then you can see that there's some green over there, and then there's houses in the background. So this baby is new life emerging on our planet and into our society. At least that's what he signified for me. And how the baby lives his life will very much depend on who he is. and that God life that's within him, you know, when he comes into being. His relationships with the people around him, and how he deals with the experiences in his life, just to name a few. Like, how are the people around us? How are they being? And how they're treating us as we grow. And then how we deal with those experiences in life. And then how do we treat the people that are in our lives? And that is our responsibility. So the brown grass around, to me, you know, show the cycle of life. Because here we've got this little baby, and then we've got, you know, this brown grass or dirt over here, and then we've got green grass over there. And I was reminded that we humans cannot generate grass or the ground on which it grows. We can't do that. And it's like, nor for that matter, the baby which is sitting on the grass, although we may have we'll have a part in that process. God has the power and created the world in which we live. So the houses in the background, which are on the other side of this little lake, remind me that actions were necessary to build the home shown. If nobody had taken any action, then nothing would have happened. There wouldn't have been any homes there. And there wouldn't have been a little home there for that little baby that's sitting on the ground, because I'm making the connection that he actually comes from one of those houses over there. So our actions make a difference. They make a difference in our lives and in the lives of those around us. The question is, what will our actions produce? 2 weeks ago, Friday night, something happened which was, I felt really sad about. The son of friends of mine were murdered in Austin. And the young man was Ubering. He was out being of service to people. And I was really reminded that that's really what our lives are about as we move through our daily lives and as we move out into the world, is to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And so he was Ubering that night to generate some income. And something happened, and he had 2 boys with him, age 15 and 13. And something happened, and somebody wasn't happy with somebody. And one of the boys stabbed him in the neck, and he died. The young man was 18. He was well-liked, was very active in his school and in his life. His memorial service was a week ago Saturday, and I estimated that there were 350 people at the service. The church was packed. If there could have been any more, if there was any more space in there, I think we would have been sitting on the floor in the aisles. And this tragedy reminds me that our actions and the actions of the people around us do have consequences. What I do, what each of us does in our daily lives, and as we move through our lives and into our communities and into our work, determines, what we're going to create. And for a long time in my life, I thought that you guys were all the problem. But, I wind up being led to a spiritual life, like playing. and I started going to Unity after I moved to Texas. And so, what is our thinking going to create? Will it be sorrow and pain for ourselves and others? Or will it be a demonstration of God's power in our lives? Will we be co-creators that bring us love to those around us, or will we create discord and sadness? What are we doing to create the life we want? What are we doing to determine and fulfill God's will in our life? From what thoughts, words, and actions are we creating our life? Are we aligning our heart mind with God? Are we living the truth we know through our thoughts, words, and actions? And as I experienced this process that I was telling you about, where this young man died, I had to deal with the thoughts and the feelings that I had within me. And what came up for me was prayer. those two boys, and I prayed for my friends, and I prayed for the soul of their son, a fine young man. And so the conclusion that I have reached then is that may we each live our lives in accord with God's will for us and our 5 basic unity principles. Thanks, everybody.